Right now. All right. Welcome everyone to the May Marine Ecosystems Collaboration Team meeting. My name is Andrew. I am a member of the IARPC Secretariat. I am sure many of you have been in an IARPC meeting before. For those who have not, welcome. I'm just gonna go over some quick tech, intros. So please stay muted while we have speakers talking. If you have questions, we will have a question and answer session at the end of the speaker talks. If you have a question that you want to get on, just get down before, while you're having that, go ahead and just put it in the chat and I will make sure that that question gets asked. This meeting is being recorded, and this, along with meeting notes, will be published. And the last thing I'll just ask is if everyone could just in the chat, please go ahead and type your name, affiliation, and if it's your first IARPC meeting, we would also like to know that as well. And as we're doing that, I think we will pass the torch on to Jackie, who will be introducing our speakers and topic for today.
Sure, I just put my name into the chat box, but not a lot of the acronym. Thank you very much for joining on the call. We have 3 speakers today, but before we start, just a little, most of you, I think everybody that's online knows what IARPC is on the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, and that we're in the midst of working on the next 5-year plan. So any input you have on that, you could go to the IARPC site. So the purpose is to do coordination across science as well as management, and having open discussions on a monthly basis related to topics pertinent to the different collaborative teams, as well as we have cross-link webinars at the same time. So on the Marine Ecosystem Collaborative Team, we do focus on everything from physics, chemistry, biology, modeling, sea ice, across ecosystems, and as well as interactions with coastal communities and interest in data activities. So that's just a brief out. And I am co-chairing the team with Danielle Dixon, who's on the line, who might want to say a few words from North Pacific Research Board, as well as Kathy Kuhn, who's from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in Anchorage. So Danielle, do you have anything you want to say?
No, thanks. Just welcome everyone. And it's so great to see some new faces, and even Marit from halfway around the world. Thanks for joining us, especially given the time difference. It's great to see everyone, and I'm looking forward to the talks.
All right, great. Thanks a lot. Our first speaker would have, and I don't know what happened to Bill Williams, because he's confirmed to talk about the Joint Ocean Ice Studies. So I have sent him a note, so hopefully he'll come on. So I think towards the end of the 3 presentations that we have, the purpose is to provide an update on international and national observing. And we focus on these 3 topics for the Beaufort Gyre work that's being done with Canadian, Japan, and US. Bill is from the Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And we'll start off with actually Karen Ashton, and I will do the first introduction on her while we're hoping that Bill joins us toward the end and answers my email. So Karen is at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute as a research scientist, and she is the department chair of the biology department. She will give us a presentation on the International Synoptic Arctic Survey that was initiated in 2020 and moving on to 2021 and 2022, as well as the MOSAiC program. So at this point, and Karen is a biological oceanographer specializing in zooplankton dynamics and ecosystem and modeling activities. And I can let Karen say a few more words about herself if she'd like to. So Karen, are you ready to take it over?
I am.
Thank you.
I'm hoping, yes, there we go. Okay, I'm going to start with the Synoptic Arctic Survey. And come on, there we go. And okay. So can everybody see that in presenter in nice normal view? Okay, great. So, yes. So yeah, I'm going to give a little update on the Synoptic Arctic Survey, which I know that probably most of you have heard of, but I thought I would start by just doing a quick review of what it is. And I put this together, but I've always had help from Jackie, who's the co-chair of the U.S. Science Steering Committee for the SAS, and also other SAS participants from around the Arctic. So very briefly, the SAS is attempting to understand what the present state and major ongoing transformations are of the Arctic marine system. And what's interesting about the SAS, of course, to me is that it specifically focuses on the ecosystem and carbon system, which haven't been studied as much as some of the other systems. And so the goal is to describe this present state of the Arctic Ocean so that we can have some data against which to compare future work, because we find that often we don't really have a very comprehensive view of past states, so it's very difficult to detect change. And the program has 3 key foci, physical drivers of importance to the ecosystem and the carbon system, the ecosystem response, and then the carbon cycle and ocean acidification. And the vision was to repeat each decade, but right now I'll be talking about us trying to get the first decade work going. So the SAS is led, it's an international program that was ground up. It was formed by scientists from around the Arctic. It's led by an International Science Steering Committee, who I've listed here, and you can see there's a number of countries represented, and I'd like to point out that we now have a representative from Italy as well, who's joined us. And then in the US, we have a Science Steering Committee as well that's led by myself and Jackie, and we have representatives from physical oceanography with Seth Danielson and Mary Louise, and then from chemical oceanography with Nick Bates, Laurie Juranic, and Cindy Pilskin. So, I didn't realize this bounces in. Okay, well, the SAS, this is kind of a schematic that people have probably seen before. And really what it's trying to point out here is that the systems that we're looking at, the marine system, the carbon cycle and acidification, and the physical oceanography are really interlocked. And so we can't really, our goal is to look at the connectivity of all of them across the Pan-Arctic in a very comprehensive way, with the goal of doing it as synoptically as possible. So at the same time. And another overlying theme here is that central to all this is training, education, and outreach. And I'm not going to read all these questions. You can find them in the SAS science plan that is available at the SAS website, which I will have on another slide. And so the goal, as I said, would be to have shared international coverage of the Arctic Ocean. And this is a tried and true map. I'm sure many people have seen this before, but it does show how we are attempting to find areas of the Arctic Ocean for the different programs that are distinct from the other areas. But at the same time, we also have some overlap in geographic overlap, which is nice because that it permits us to do intercalibrations and intercomparisons to see if our data are being, collected in an analogous way, and we can make sure that we're all measuring things in the same manner. So I'll go through this a little bit. So we have efforts from Canada focusing on the Beaufort Sea and the Canada Basin, and hopefully Bill Williams will be here to talk more about that. Also some work in the Denmark Strait. Denmark and Canada are also working in over to the west of Greenland. One big project that is the fieldwork is finished, which is not formally part of the SAS, but for which was sampling many of the SAS core parameters, was of course the MOSAiC program that was conducted from 2019 to 2020. Sweden is planning a program this summer on the Odin, that's shown as the yellow track. And then Japan has been working on the Chukchi Sea and over in the northern Chukchi Sea and over the Chukchi Cap, as well as Korea, also working in a similar area. And China has proposed cruises using the Shuilong and the Shuilong 2. And then finally over in the west, I guess it's the Eastern Barents, we have some programs from Russia and Germany. The US has proposed a cruise shown in green, and our area is that dashed line shown in green, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So we have been the program is ongoing despite the pandemic, and last summer some ships were able to get out and do some field work. The Japan and the Mirai and the Aran from Korea, the Louis St-Laurent did go out. Denmark sent out the Dana, and Germany, of course, had the Polarstern out as part of the MOSAiC program. But a lot more field work is planned for 2021. I listed some of the countries and the ships here, and there's another slide that shows even more. that are going out in 2021. So it's really ramping up. The program was originally envisioned to be 2020 and then 2021, but now we've had to slip our window a bit because of the pandemic. And so instead of it being a single year, it's actually going to end up being several years. In preparation for all this field work, we've been busy identifying standard operating procedures for the sampling. And this was particularly useful and necessary for the ecosystem parameters, because not to make light of it, but it's kind of hard to have different operating procedures for measuring temperature and salinity. So, but for example, zooplankton, you could use a whole multiple different sets of net sizes, net mesh sizes. So we've been standardizing those across the programs. They're based on the MOSAiC SOPs, which is great because that means MOSAiC is in accordance with what we're doing in the SAS. And this will permit better intercomparison of data between the different countries, ships, and scientists. The SAS has also been running a seminar series or a set of webinars during the spring of 2021, which have been very, very interesting. The most recent one featured short talks by a series of early career scientists. And there's a lot more information on that and on the SAS itself at this website, the Synoptic Arctic Survey website, which I've typed at the bottom. But if you type in Synoptic Arctic Survey in Google, that is the first thing that comes up. So you can find it without even having that URL. So this is a nice map that I think Paulina made or got. It came from Paulina from Sweden, showing again where the ships will be, or the ideas that the ships would be working around the Arctic. What's particularly nice about this one is she's put on the green line, which shows the MOSAiC track. The MOSAiC program, as you know, ran during the pandemic, and it was based on the Polarstern, and each of those little red dots shows the beginning and the end of a leg of the ship. And unfortunately, my little red circle is slipped. It should be around these two dots here. Sorry about that. Oops. Come on, back. But the point here of the little red circle is to point out that there was a break in the track, and that was because of the pandemic. The ship had to leave the ice and go to Svalbard to do a personnel transfer and resupply. And so it's a geographic gap just to the north of the Yermak Plateau, but I think more importantly, it's a seasonal gap. So MOSAiC was unable to do a lot of studies during May and June because the ship was not in place. It took a while to reestablish the camp too, once they returned to the ice floe. So on the left, I've listed, I think as best I could deduce many of the SAS expeditions in these 3 years of 2020 to 2022. Some of them are still planned and some of them have already happened. And you can see there's multiple ships, including again, Italy is planning one. As I mentioned before, the Odin is going out in 2020, and that's going to be she's going to be working to the north of Greenland here. And then the US has a proposed program that would be working in the western part of the Central Arctic, or this area here, the Canadian Basin. And again, many countries have ongoing programs that will be conducted during these years. And these are all the ships and their operating areas. So you can see we've got a pretty good pan-Arctic coverage between all the different nations. This just shows briefly the Swedish plans, and this was originally planned for 2020, and now it's occurring in 2021. They plan to work to the north of Greenland, which is great because this is an area where nobody else is going to be able to go and they're going to be using the Odin, and they're going to be sampling across multiple parts of the ecosystem, which is what's listed here. This is a kind of a small slide, but they plan to do many of the SAS core parameters. And if I think these slides are available later, so you can read them more carefully and actually deduce the type. I'm sorry, I couldn't change it. It came from a PDF. But there's a whole bunch of different core parameters that are going to be measured. They're going to be looking at the ecosystem from the very smallest portion of the trophic structure all the way up to seabirds and marine mammals. And they'll be sampling using standard depths as shown on the left, which the rest of us will also be doing. As I mentioned, the US has a pending proposal to the National Science Foundation. It was submitted by the Science Steering Committee last September. And if it's funded, the plan is to reach out to the US science community to encourage additional people to submit proposals to join the cruise with research projects that are complementary to the SAS research and to what's already been funded to take place on the ship. And the goals of the US effort are to quantify the present states of physics, biology, and biogeochemistry in the Pacific, Arctic, and Canadian Basin. And we had proposed to do this in summer 2022, and to try to detect change through comparisons with historical data, and to describe linkages with adjacent regions such as the shelf. And also what's nice here is we do have overlap with the work being done by South Korea and Japan with the Aran and the Mirai cruises, and also the work done in the Canada Basin on the Louis Saint-Laurent. So lots of good opportunities for intercomparisons with those cruises. This shows the proposed cruise track for this effort. It's the Northern Canadian Basin. It's a region not covered by other SAS efforts, but it also has been studied historically, including by the Trans-Arctic section in 1994, which was the last real ecosystem assessment of this region. And these cruise tracks was specifically chosen to overlap with the cruise track from that effort, as well as the GeoTraces cruise track. And you can see it lies over the shelves and slopes here as well, or the shelf slope boundary, as well as going through the basin and then back down this way on one of the other cruise tracks. And I've just listed all the proposed measurements on the right hand side. You can see it's fairly comprehensive. And the plan would be to do both long and short stations, with the long stations being the red dots and the short stations being the cyan dots, and standard. And then we would hope, if we could, to tow a CTD in between the stations. And as I mentioned, the idea would be that people could join. And so this is just a list of potential research areas that could be open for people to write proposals to come and join the crew. So you can see there's a bunch of different things that someone could propose, ranging from primary productivity all the way up to marine mammal abundance and distribution. So lots of opportunities here if this is actually funded. And that's the conclusion of what I have to show for the SAS. Do you want me to, does anyone have any questions at this point?
Yeah, I think people could ask if there's no questions, and you can move on to MOSAiC, and then at the end, we can open it up for both of them.
Is that okay? I will go back and find my MOSAiC presentation now. So hang on a second.
Okay.
And
just so everybody know that Bill will join us at the end. So I'll do the next presentation after Karen's, and then proceed with that, with Bill getting back on.
Jackie, maybe you could answer a quick one while Karen's firing those slides. Sure. What's the time frame for putting that proposal into NSF to see whether the cruise is going to go?
Well, right now it's in that stage. It's in the final decision mode right now, and so I would imagine within the next month we'll have a final determination, and then there'll be a letter that we will put out as the steering committee out to the community, probably be via the Arctic listserv and so forth about this opportunity. So I'm hoping that we have some answer within the next 3 or 4 weeks, something like that.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, so for the MOSAiC update, I reached out to one of the eco team co-leads, Allison Fong, who provided me with a great information on what's been going on, because of course all I really know about what's going on is the things I'm really intimately involved in. I think I actually forgot to include something here, but anyway, most people are working on sample analysis and processing and initial analyses. In a second, if I can get rid of this thing. Probably 95% of our effort is focused on processing the samples. We collected thousands of samples across the array of ecosystem parameters, and also not only just the ecosystem team, but also the ice and biogeochemistry teams collected a whole bunch of samples. So we're all really busy working on analyzing those. But planning is ongoing for syntheses and intergroup synergies in the future. Now, why didn't this go? Oh, there we go. Okay. So here's some of the other ongoing activities, or some more specifics. For example, analysis of or QA/QC is underway for a lot of the basic core measurements, such as chlorophyll, nutrients, and primary productivity. And also QA/QC of some of the common sea ice coring data and activities. Bacterial production samples are still being analyzed. There's DNA samples are being sequenced for metagenomics. Water column light microscopy samples are being analyzed at the AVI, which is great. And also sea ice microscopy is going to be sampled in Poland, analyzed in Poland. Carbon and nitrogen analyses of POM and animals are underway at AVI and the University of Rhode Island. And we're also looking at video and image analyses from the fish camera and doing copepod and zooplankton morphological measurements from photographic images. So this is just a smattering of the things that people are working on when the more project specific or the ecosystem specific things. We do have some upcoming events and meetings. There is an all hands MOSAiC in person, we hope, workshop planned for the week of October 18th in Potsdam, Germany. And most of the discussions at that meeting are going to focus on cross-cutting ideas and syntheses and looking at interdisciplinary efforts and trying to really come up with those linkages. And personally, I'm looking forward to really trying to synergize with some of the modelers as well, because that's kind of far away from laboratory analyses, but it's also an important part. A number of small groups are potentially planning in-person small meetings prior to this, so that we could focus on really looking at our data together within our specific particular discipline. A number of MOSAiC sessions are envisioned for future scientific conferences such as AGU or Ocean Sciences or EGU. And I'm happy to report that a Central Arctic Ecosystem session highlighting MOSAiC results, but not exclusively for MOSAiC, has been proposed for the 2022 Ocean Sciences meeting in Honolulu. And then moving into 2022, there's a thought that there might be an all hands meeting for MOSAiC in the US, potentially in Boulder, Colorado. There's a number of cross-cutting working groups that are going on, because of course one of the great goals of MOSAiC was try to really link all the different pieces of the ecosystem or the system, excuse me, together. And so we have a lot of cross-cutting working groups that have regular meetings over Zoom. One example being summer stratification. And those involve people from multiple teams. There still are opportunities for new people to join the MOSAiC. So there are new proposals being submitted by members of MOSAiC teams, as well as other groups and colleagues, to various funding agencies for continued support of the data analyses of ECO and beyond. And those efforts need to go through the MOSAiC project board for endorsement. They are receiving 1 to 2 endorsement requests a month. But I mean, I'm sure I'm not on the project board, but I can't imagine if somebody did, if someone comes in with a great idea that that involves and collaborates with people, I'm sure that they would look upon that favorably. And there are some special issues that are planned. There's an issue of Elementa that is like they call live and receiving submissions. And it's not just for overview publications, but all kinds of MOSAiC science. And as far as the ecosystem goes, we are doing an ecosystem overview paper for that. And there will also be an interesting new type of special feature. It's in something called Scientific Data Nature, which is new to me, but it's going to be a data descriptor publications or set of publications in the winter of 2021 or the spring of 2022. And there's others of course, there'll be other special issues that come down the road, but these is just the initial ones based on our first findings and of course the data, which I have to say data archiving and data organization for MOSAiC is truly a monumental task. And that's all I have for MOSAiC.
All right, thank you, Karen. Are there any questions to Karen related to her MOSAiC presentation or for the previous SAS? How many people do you expect at your workshop in the fall?
Oh, I actually don't know. I mean,
Okay.
MOSAiC could be hundreds, but what's the word? Anyway, we're really hoping it works out. People in Germany are beginning to get vaccinated. As you know, US people are starting to be able to go back to Europe. And I don't know if they're going to let people in from Britain though. But it's just such a sort of up in the air. But the past MOSAiC workshops have been on the order of hundreds because there's like a lot of people. And, there were, what did they say, 600 people participated on the ship. And but that includes, of course, the crew, but there's just a lot of people, and it would be the first time many people would get together again after the field effort. So, I would envision, for me personally, that we would probably bring at least 4 people to that meeting.
Thanks.
Because we have a postdoc, and then we have a very involved technical person who would probably contribute as well.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the group online right now? And if not, we can come back. I would say you can put them in the chat too, so we'll read through on the chat box, and if there's any questions to follow up. So thank you, Karen, for the updates on the information, and there's a lot going on there, I think. The second talk is my own, and so I'm going to be sharing my screen on to give you an update on the Distributed Biological Observatory, as well as the some of the updates from the Pacific Arctic Group. And I'm assuming everybody can see this. Fingers up. Yes, thank you. Just checking. Okay, so okay, I would do it this way again. Okay, so I think everybody knows what the Pacific Arctic Group is, but I just want to briefly make a few statements on it to bleed into the rest of the talk here. Bill Williams, who will be joining in on us, is the chair of the Pacific Arctic Group right now. We rotate between the 6 countries. So prior to this, Jiafeng He from China was the chair, and it changed over. We are hoping to be able to have our fall meeting that we normally rotate around countries in Victoria, but that'll depend on Canada opening its borders to go northward. And unless you're essential, which is, I think we are, but right now we're waiting for that. So it may be a virtual again. So we are built on the idea of having a regional partnership to coordinate and plan activities. And they range from field activities to syntheses and publications, and I'll briefly mention that. So right now, we have been developing and implementing long-term monitoring activities. So we started off with the Distributed Biological Observatory. There's the Pacific Arctic Climate Ecosystem Observatory, PASEO, and then movement now into the deeper Arctic as part of the Central Arctic Ocean and the Synoptic Arctic Survey. So those are 3 observing type of networks that are involved, in addition to the one like Bill will mention on the Beaufort Gyre Observatory. So we are also involved in the syntheses, as I mentioned, and we are working on a variety of activities and actually expanding it into for example, the DBO to Baffin Bay and the Atlantic Arctic. So we have these biannual meetings. In the spring, we meet during Arctic Science Summit Week. So in 2019, before COVID happened, we were in Russia. And then actually our fall meeting was in China. And then after that, we've been in virtual mode, but we get good input. And so we had one in November, and then of course in spring during Arctic Science Summit Week. So every spring is Arctic Science Summit Week, every fall is into a rotating around. So in 2021, there'll be virtual probably in Canada unless they open up. 2022, by then we'll be fully opened up, I'm sure, and we'll be hosting it in the US somewhere. So as I mentioned, these are the 2 core programs. I'll show you some examples. The DBO is the observing system. We focus in primarily on these 1 through 5, although we've built out now with, particularly with our Canadian colleagues, into 6 and 8 here off of in the Polinia region over in the Bathurst area. But I will just focus in on this, and we have multiple ships coordinate activities. And then the other one is the Pacific Arctic Climate Ecosystem Observatory, where primarily our Asian Canadian colleagues have been working in the Canada Basin and over in the Chukchi borderland. So in 2021, we had in 2020, we had limited ship, but we did have Japan and Korea had their ships out doing and including some of the DBO. We had a NOAA cruise on both the Oscar Dyson as well as the Norseman 2, and we were able to do sampling on that. And then Rebecca Woodgate was able to get the crew to turn her moorings in 2020. But since that time, 2021 is opening up, although we still have a lot of COVID issues to deal with and quarantining. So the Iran is going out in July, and they'll occupy the DBO down here and go up in the Pakio area. The Marai will go out in September and October, and they'll be occupying 4 of the DBO lines, and then they work on the slope and then up into the Pakio region. The Laurier, working with our Canadian colleagues, has considered this cruise essential, and so that's how we're working through getting across the border. We've passed security through the Canadians, and then we will quarantine up in Canada for 2 weeks and be COVID tested 3 times. The supply ship, this is just to confirm with on the NOAA ship, the joint program of the DBO and the EcoFoci was Ecosystems and Fisheries will be August 20th, September 19th. And then Rebecca Woodgate's work on the Norseman too. So those are the cruises specifically related to the DBO PAG activities. So just briefly, these are just one-pagers that we are related to the different cruises. We will occupy the 5 standard stations within these bounding boxes here. The contact actually, the chief scientist is, I didn't update this, is actually another person. John will not be on this particular cruise. And it's Sarah Zimmerman from DFO. But we do the standard measurements on TNS and salinity, currents, looking at carbon products, nutrients, chlorophyll, the different trophic levels from phytoplankton up to macrobenthos, and then marine mammal and seabird surveys. So if we move on to the next cruise, just a little bit of data in there, and that this is from the 219, which is our last cruise on there. And I would just point out the really warm water on the surface. This is working across this area right here. This is a DBO line. This is under Alaska coastal water near shore and picking up the Bering Sea water in the offshore. This is the highest biomass that we have on the benthos and really high productivity seasonally in the water column. You can just other thing to point out is the deep subsurface, the chlorophyll max between the 20 and 30 meters depth. This is what's there by the time we're there in July. So we are comparing this when the Koreans go across this, or the Japanese are, and as part of our joint Canadian effort. So the Rebecca's Bering Strait mooring, as you can see here, this is a plan for July of 2021 on the Norseman. And she just has a new paper out in 2021 if you go to her website. But the main point to see that you're getting those transport increases, Bering Strait, warming water, increasing declining salinity, so more fresh water going into that Chukchi system. The Koreans will have the Aeron out again, and due to COVID, the same thing with our Japanese colleagues. They primarily are starting in their home countries, which makes for 2 to 3 month cruises. They're looking at environmental parameters, physics to biology and chemistry, due to the sea ice changes that are going on and the rapid retreat and the environmental changes, and also looking at satellite-based sea ice differences and modeling activities. So they will also have 2 campsites if they're finding any ice up here. And their plan is to be July to September. Hello, Bill. And then this is who our the chief scientist is. So they standard as a standard go across the DBO3 before going up in the Pacquiao area. The joint cruise we have with the EcoFoci program with Phyllis Stabenow and myself, as well as I'll be chief scientist on this one. And they have, we will be doing the DBO in August and September, but also running the Icy Cape line, doing a lot of mooring turnarounds. The Chukchi Environmental Observatory, which has a sediment trap up here in the DBO4, a new emplacement by Catherine Lalonde and Phyllis at the DBO1, a sediment trap here. With her Phyllis's time series mooring. And then on the return, coming back on the 70-meter isobath, and with embedded in this are core DBO measurements when we're on this region, but the EcoFoci are looking at a lot of physical, biological zooplankton, and there will be some limited benthic trawling on this cruise. We will have a seabird observer on also. On the previous cruise, we'll also have a seabird observer on the DBO. So the Mariah is out there in September and October. They will occupy the DBO 1, 2, 3, and in the region of the DBO 5 up here, but they focus in on this region, and then they go up to this the Canada Basin, and then working on the Chukchi borderlands. And the Amane Fujiwara is the chief scientist for that, and they will do those standard measurements that they normally do, physics to biology, upper trophic levels also. So just one example of some results. This is a paper by Nishio et al. Came up in 2020 related to the retreating sea ice and the expansion of demersal fisheries assemblages into the Northern Bering and Chukchi. So they were looking at the mechanisms associated with the sea ice conditions, particularly on the prey. And they're looking at the change in Arctic species, boreal species, and you can see with the impact of warming temperatures. So they were finding out that the higher bottom water temperatures are increasing the density as boreal species. We are seeing some of that same type of northern in our benthic system that we look at on the DBO, a contraction of the Arctic species and an enhancement of some of the subarctic species into the regions of each one of these sites that we do. But on this particular one, it's the DBO1 region and is an example of the products that have come out in the science arena. So there's also developing Atlantic sectors of the DBOs. There's the Atlantic DBO on the right. Marit is on the phone here. This will actually be expanded upon and further developed by part of the newly funded EU project called Arctic Passion, which is basically a network and also developing areas for the Pan-Arctic observing system. So it's implementing both observations for societal needs and connecting with other observatories in a Pan-Arctic fashion. So that's just going into the original 6-year funding starting in July. I'm associated with that as a non-funded collaborator. Rebecca, similar, other folks also at the international level, also from Korea and Japan to build out this Pan-Arctic network. Then I also might point out on the left, this is the Baffin Bay Davis Strait developing DBO lines inside of their observing system. And Kumiko Ezetsu-Scott has forwarded this to me. And also, there's also in the Davis Strait area with Craig Lee and Kate Stafford's funded work up in that region. So these are exciting times to expand this. And also there'll be some, we're trying to work with our Russian colleagues, and that's a work in progress. I just want to just highlight a few things before I move on and end this, and that is we did put a proposal in, Lee Cooper and myself, along with members of the, you can see their names, of the executive committee on the Pacific Arctic Group to enable early career scientists and Indigenous participants as using cross-platform opportunities. It's just a small amount of money to start with, but the idea is to improve international participation in these cruises for early career and Indigenous folks. They're also, we recognize that this is, there's already activities going on in the ship, but we thought it was worthwhile to start pursuing this, and we have, and also recognizing the need to involve Indigenous knowledge holders. It's not as straightforward without additional institutional support. So whereas the Western science, we can say we're going to pay for their flights and their COVID time, and they would go on the ship if there's space available and time on the wire. But with our colleagues on the coastal communities, we need to build a mechanism in order to have them to have some support for those activities of which they'd be involved. Right now, it's pretty limited because of the COVID situation. There is an opening on a Korean cruise, but it's going to take quite a large investment of time and support for the COVID quarantining in Korea and then access. So that may not happen this year. We do have a Russian scientist, if anybody knows of a cruise that has a space available that wants to be involved in benthic trawling, he has the capability and interest to do that, and we have the support for the travel. So I've just put that out. As far as synthesis, we have our, we're getting the PLOS one. We have 22 articles going into open access. Oh, good spelling, Jackie, progress. But we have some that are in press, others that are in review, and others that are still being submitted, but we plan to close that in June. And it ranges everything, and you can see the different measurements here from hydrography to upper trophic organisms. PLOS one is part of the agreement. We're developing a DBO project webpage, and they will have a social blog once they get a minimum number of papers. So I'll let everybody know about that when it happens. And then there are also archived presentations from the DBO during Arctic Science Summit Week and also Alaska Marine Science Symposium. And there's some links. And so you can get to these links once this is and I think this talk is already posted on our Marine site. I did want to bring up the data access issue. So I've been trying to get this into one location. We do have all the NSF supported, goes to the Arctic Data Center. We have an Arctic project portal. connecting that with NOAA data entry, some that goes to the Alaska Ocean Observing System, some that goes to the National Centers for Environmental Information, and some of the physical oceanography is via Woods Hole. And so building at least some metadata linkages to where these DBO data sets, that's something we're working on with the Arctic Data Center. Seabird stuff goes to the pelagic database, NASA. We are working on that. Those in the DBO will be getting a poll about whether the products are being useful, what could be improved. And there is a website there though, every 2 weeks they do an update and do statistics on what's happening from currents to winds to surface temperature, water, and chlorophyll. Korea has a really nice website. It's an interactive web-based system. They call it CHAOS, for Korean Arctic Ocean Data System. And there's a link for that. And you can actually drop your own data sets into it to try to get some first cut figures and analysis. And then Japan has the Arctic Data Archive System. The MOSAiC data goes into that. It goes in via Darwin and also part of that. And so you can go to that site and have some, find out what the data set's available. They do have data embargo for a period of time, but this is where the data for both the DBO and the Synoptic Arctic Survey are going. So in conclusion, I would just say we are seeing, and you can't necessarily see it from this talk, but lots of dynamic changes going on from physics to biology. The DBO sampling is both seasonal and interannual, and they're often bedded inside process cruises, so you're getting a lot of bang for your buck besides just the measurements for the DBO. And I just wanted to say, to look at these changes, we're building out on the modeling effort within the program. So I just want to conclude there and just say thank you for everybody that's been involved with that funding sources, and particularly the Pacific Arctic Group, who was very instrumental in facilitating the connectivity. So I'm happy. There's a couple of websites here, both for the DBO, the new website we have here at the University of Maryland, and also where you can access the Arctic DBO project page. Okay, so with that, if there are any questions, happy to answer them. Hello?
We can hear you, Jackie.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I'm getting caught on my own desktop of too many things I have under the layers. Go ahead.
Hey, Jackie, this is Mike Steele.
Hi, Mike.
That was like so impressive. It's ridiculous. I mean, DBO has eaten the Arctic. I mean, you've just got so much going on. It's I could ask many questions. One question I had was the area to the north of the Chukchi, whatever you call that, the Pacific Arctic thing.
Oh, the pack, right.
So does that have? I think the idea of DBO is that there are these standard, stations in
Right.
that you encourage people to go over to and take some samples. So does that exist for this area?
That's a good point. I mean, that is one of the things that when we were building that program, and you can see it here on the right-hand figure, is that they're trying to build one line of which the different countries would occupy for comparison. Something we're doing in the SAS2 is to have some calibration line, but some of them overlap. Part of them are overlapping, some are expanding on it. So I wouldn't say every one of these lines is in there, but that was at least one of them to try to do this cross calibration.
Okay. So
And I think what I need to do, Mike, is to actually get the representatives from the people working from this particular one to actually give a presentation. And I think that would give us a good update on that. And we can ask further questions on that observatory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jackie, some of the nations have been sampling for that Paseo region for several years, right?
Yes. And particularly the Korea and Japan and they have and I think if you go to the Arctic Science Summit Week website, they've got like 10 or 15 years of which they have repetitive data sets on their collections that they've done there. So there's a real time series actually built up in this area here by both those countries. And so for they are starting to be ripe for time series synthesis analysis. Anything else? Because I think what I'd like to do is, I see Bill is online, and welcome. And if you have any other questions, put it in the chat. Otherwise, Bill Williams, I think I'm going to have you come on board.
Okay. Hi, Jackie. I should apologize. I had omitted to put this in my calendar. And so I'm going to show the few slides that I showed at the Pacific Arctic Group meeting and invite any questions about joint ocean ice studies. Now let's see. Slideshow. Okay, slide. I need to share my screen here. There we go.
That's right.
This one.
There you go. You're coming. There you are.
Excuse me. So, okay.
I see it.
Is that working?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I was asked to introduce the JOICE program, but I see from the participants that you probably already know all about it anyway. It began in 2003. It is a program to monitor the freshwater content of the Beaufort Gyre. It was begun collaboratively between Eddie Carmack, Fiona McLaughlin, Andre Proshetinsky, and Rick Crishfield, and the National Science Foundation in Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And now it's being led by Isabella Lebras from Woods Hole. Andre and Rick are slowly stepping back, and also being led by Mary Louise Timmermans from Yale. We're funded till 2024. It's always been aboard the CCGS Louis S. Saint-Laurent, the Canadian icebreaker. And this is how we monitor the freshwater content of the Beaufort Gyre. These are our stations. They're standard stations. We've done the same station since 2003. And to walk you through this, at the moment we go around this way. All the blue dots are CTD stations. We do XCTDs between the blue dots to fill in the gaps. At these sites, these are the Woods Hole Arctic Observing Network Beaufort Gyre Observing System moorings at these 3 sites. And they measure, they have the McLean moored profile is crawling up and down the wire up to about 30 meters deep. And then these 2 sites are the ice-based observatories. These are nominal sites. This is where ice-tethered profilers, ice mass balance buoys, Arctic Ocean flux buoys, and other buoys are put into the ice, and then they drift with the ice as the ice goes around the Beaufort Gyre. We can't do them in these locations anymore because the ice has changed so much. So the cruise goes up around here to attempt to find 4 sites to put 4 sites with good enough ice to put ITPs into each year. And usually we only find about 3 sites now at most. And one of the ITPs needs to be deployed in open water. Let's see. This is an ITP going into the ice, and it's a 2019 picture, and you can see this broad, flat ice flow. The ice flow is probably 2 or 3 years old, and back in the 2000s, this would be a jumble of ice with big pressure ridges and very old multi-year ice, and we would have been at that time looking for ice that was thin enough to put the ITP into, whereas now we're looking for ice that's thick enough, and we have these big flows of thinner, younger ice instead. Let's see, this year we have up to 24, 25 participants. We're a little earlier this year because of some changes with the Coast Guard. We're going from the 19th of August rather than beginning in the middle of September. I'm no longer chief scientist. I'm staying home again, so Sarah Zimmerman will be chief scientist, and she's done it more than I have. Anything to add here? The thing to add here is that the mission is based on monitoring the Beaufort Gyre and monitoring the freshwater content of the Beaufort Gyre. But what we tend to fill the ship with interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary projects to make it a more well-rounded program. So we have our CTDs, and we collect biogeochemical water samples from the CTDs to look at the evolution of the geochemistry and the low trophic levels of the ecosystem. We also do bongo nets to monitor the zooplankton in the region. So this is just the long list of fairly standard samples. We do include iodine-129 and uranium-236 for John Smith and Noria Casa Kuberta from Zurich. And we are tracing using dissolved organic material as traces with Salinga GAN and doing microbial diversity with Connie Lovejoy and David Walsh. Let's see. There's doing PCO2 with Mike de Grandpré from University of Manitoba, from University of Montana. We don't have, our meteorological data is simply an AVOS weather station. We don't have a big meteorological tower on this icebreaker. And sea ice observations are being done by Jenny Hutchings from Oregon State University and Kazu Tateyama from Japan. Let's see, next slide. Oops, go back. So we have a time series since 2003 and of freshwater content and whatever else we would like in the Beaufort Gyre, and this is displaying the freshwater content from 2003 up to 2020. So 3, 5, 8, 12, 16, and 20 here, and showing the increase in freshwater content of the Beaufort Gyre as the anticyclonic forcing of the gyre has persisted over that time. And we expected during this time that the Arctic Ocean oscillation would change from anticyclonic, which accumulates fresh water, to cyclonic, which would lead to a relaxation of the gyre and fresh water leaving the gyre. But that, while it seems like the change to cyclonic conditions is, although it's long overdue, it seems imminent at the moment. The AOO is only mildly anticyclonic. It hasn't, that change hasn't happened yet, and we shall see what has happened this year when we go out in August. The heat content, one of the changes in the Beaufort Gyre is changes in the heat content of the Pacific summer water and the amount of the Pacific winter water. Both of these feed into a part of the changes in the freshwater content. And this is a time series of the heat content of the Pacific summer water from 2003 to 2020 again. Back to the another view of the freshwater content and heat content, showing the, in this case, showing the different water masses that contribute to the freshwater content. The Pacific winter water staying relatively constant here, but with an obvious increase in the freshwater content of the Pacific summer water over time. And there's a graph from Mary Louise Timmermans here showing the increase in the heat content of the Pacific summer water over time also in this 50 to 100 meter layer. With Michio Yamamoto Kawai leading the geochemistry on the expeditions, she measures the ocean acidification and does the the inorganic carbon, the DIC, the alkalinity, and in this case plotted is the saturation state. They have a paper here showing the decrease in omega since an estimate of pre-industrial times, and then a decrease in 2006, which has persisted since then. And it's largely due to the melting of multi-year ice. And here the changes in omega have been split up into the contributions from the atmosphere, the increases in temperature, the dilution effect due to sea ice melting, and the change due to atmosphere-ocean disequilibrium. Essentially, it's coming more into equilibrium now that the water is open for longer periods of time. I'm not here to talk about that one. That's the end of the slides I have for the Joint Ocean Ice Studies Arctic Observing Network Beaufort Gyre Observing System. The two names of the programs, one in Canada and one in the US. Any questions?
Thank you, Bill. Yes, any questions for Bill? So are you going out this on your cruise? Is it full open to you? You must have some COVID type of, are you taking everybody internationally too on the cruise?
Yes is the answer, but there's a lot of paperwork involved with that. The Coast Guard has basically said, yes, people can come, but those people have to get there. And things are a little bit easier for everybody because we're flying on the crew change flights to the ship and back again, which means we don't really set foot, although we're flying to Kerguelen and Cambridge Bay, we only sort of set foot on the airstrip and then get helicoptered to the ship. So there's no contact with the people of Nunavut at all. So that helps us. But people from the US and from Japan need to get permission from their employers to go, and then they need to be designated, they need to do quarantine or be designated essential workers to get through Canada to the crew change flight and be allowed on the crew change flight.
Okay. Similar to what we're trying to do for the Laurier, for the Americans.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat more complicated, and
it is for you.
yeah, and I know this is normal stuff at this point. I mean, everyone's going through it, I suspect, but you have to spend time figuring out what exactly the paperwork is that will be accepted at the security checkpoints.
That's right. That's right.
And so it goes on like that, and it's all a little bit unclear.
Okay.
So that's just the reality, but I don't suppose it's very different for any other international cruises at this point.
Any other questions for Bill at this point?
Yeah, Jackie, I have a question. This is Bob Pickard. Bill, what a very impressive program and data set that you've collected over those 20 years or so. My question is, are the data available at a public repository?
Yes. I'm just going back. It's down here. The data are here. And both the geochemistry data, the CTD data, and the mooring data are all here.
Okay, thank you.
And we've been, yeah, but the fact that you're asking the question worries me a little bit, because maybe you're expecting it to be in a database that it's not in, and that would be good to know if that's the case.
No reason to be worried, Bill. Just wanted to know. Thanks.
Yeah, that's where it is. I really like the US model of not getting next year's funding unless the data is available from last year. It seems to really keep us in line. Our DFO is much kinder to us in the sense of not providing a deadline of that sort. And so some of our other DFO data is lagging behind the Beaufort-Geier data, which is always up to date. So in some ways, I definitely approve of that approach.
Okay, Karen Ashton has a question for you, Bill. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, Bill, along the same lines of Bob's question, or maybe not, just an expansion of that. So I'm wondering, you know, when we want to look for data, we tend to go, especially for an NSF-funded AON project, which I believe Beaufort-Geier is for the US participation, we would go to the Arctic Data Center. Do you know if there's, and maybe you can pass this on to them, but there, I would wonder if there's metadata and a link to the WHOI website at the Arctic Data Center, which is sponsored by the NSF, because maybe that makes it a little more obvious where the data are if it's in that central national repository. Or it doesn't have to be there, it can just be, you know, referred to, so it's not like they have to move everything or anything like that.
I will check it's in the Arctic Data Center. I to my knowledge, when the data goes to the Woods Hole website, it then also goes further to data centers, but I should check that it's actually referenced or in the Arctic Data Center.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point because it's the same type of thing we've been trying to work with the Arctic Data Center for the DBO for non-NSF, or even you know, there's some link to link it to NOAA. So I've been talking to the Arctic Data Center and the NCEI, but also to get some pointers right to the Asian data, to the data in Korea and Japan related to this. So it's if it's not there, it's something that's being worked on our side. So we should talk during PAG in the fall, I think.
Yeah, you've heard me say before, and I've seen a recent presentation by Bob Picard in which I think one of Bob's students collected together a lot of ADCP data for the Chukchi Sea and the Chukchi borderlands.
Right.
And it must have been from a lot of different places. And that's a lot of work in just collecting the data, but it's so very useful. And I wish there was more of that happening, I suppose. It's nice to know where all the data is and have all the data pointed to, but it's even more useful if the data is actually collected together into one file that can be used.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's good discussions on that data aspect because we all are dealing with it. So anything we can share, and
That's
because
right.
it is something we're actually dealing with because of the issue, since it's a distributed data archive for the DBO, right? And it's going to be the same way for the SAS. And so if we can resolve it some way, it could be beneficial to a lot of the observing systems. So
Yeah.
anyway. Any
Um,
other questions for any of the speakers? Because otherwise, I think we're right a little over the mark. And I would say that we need to kind of close this up and to say thank you very much. Unless there's some, like, maybe take a few minutes, if anybody wants to make any announcement related to the Marine Ecosystem Collaborative Team.
Yeah, this is Danielle. Thanks so much to all the speakers. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your information. These were great talks. And please, anyone who still has questions, raise them. And I would like to take just a few more minutes to allow people to share any updates if there are any.
The only thing I would just say is that there was just you have a Beaufort-Geier link at the Arctic Data Center, Bill. He was just put in the chat box. And it was new. You have your own page. It's a Beaufort-Geier observing system and 6 data sets.
Very good. Very good.
Check that off. Sorry. Okay.
I mean, I'd like to add that you know, particularly I'm talking to everyone here. I'm constantly trying to improve the team of scientists that go aboard the Louis Saint-Laurent, and if you know of someone who might have a complementary project that doesn't take up ship time or very little, or might be able to bring some funding for a few days of ship time to the project, then please contact me, because we might be able to then find out more about the geochemistry or the ecosystem of the Beaufort Gyre that way.
So if there's anybody else that wants to make an announcement? Okay, unless I hear gone, I think it's time probably to close up this webinar, and thank you for all your participation, and we'll have another one next month.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, and thanks
Thank
Andrew
you,
for
everyone.
organizing it too, and Danielle and so forth.
And you too,
All
Jack.
speakers.